Washington is the center of the geopolitical universe. Has it also become the center of global risk? Welcome to the call. I'm Jay Sapsford. The U.S. economy is growing as we enter 2026, but prices remain elevated. Midterm elections are looming, even as tariffs, AI, and the future of innovation are all in play. Now, a stunning shift to Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere has left business to wonder. What else should we expect out of Washington in 2026? We can think of no one better to address that question than our very own Neil Bradley. Neil is Executive Vice President, Chief Policy Officer, and Head of Advocacy here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington. Happy New Year, Neil, and welcome to the call.
Happy New Year, Jay. It's great to be on with you.
All right, let's start with Venezuela. Last year's release of the National Security Strategy signaled a revival of the Monroe Doctrine and a renewed focus on Latin America. Now, this past weekend, the U.S. apprehended President Maduro and his wife and brought them to the U.S. to face narcotics charges. What does this say about the policy focus at this moment here in Washington?
Yeah, Jay, I think, what was it, about 15 years ago that we first started talking about the pivot to Asia and the idea that the U.S. and its economic and security interests were going to pivot away from Europe and the Middle East to Asia. We might want to call 2025 and 2026 the pivot to the Western Hemisphere. And so if you look at the events in Venezuela, the conversations, yes, around Greenland and Colombia, the fact that USMCA is up for review and extension in 2026, this is clearly a Western Hemisphere centric focus for the administration and therefore, by extension, Washington today.
So the National Security Strategy says explicitly that business should be front and center of this shift. And here's a quote from the document. I'm going to ask Scott to put this up on the screen here. Every U.S. government official that interacts with these countries, meaning Latin American countries, should understand that part of their job is to help American companies compete and succeed. Now, this on the surface sounds great. How should our members process this?
Yeah, well, I guess from the Chamber's perspective, I'd say that should apply to Latin America and the whole globe. The U.S. government should be a partner to American business to facilitate commerce. The reality is that the U.S. government has often been a partner, helping open markets, helping navigate particularly discriminatory foreign treatments so that U.S. companies can gain access. At the end of the day, though, the fundamentals for any U.S. company kind of remain the same. What are they looking for? They're looking for stability in the government and rule of law in the places that they operate in. And so as much help as any one government can provide, if you don't have sanctity of contracts and the ability to enforce your contracts in the countries that you're operating in, you're operating at a much higher risk, and therefore you're less likely to invest and grow there. So I hope what it means is that one of the most important things that we're doing is focusing on stability, rule of law, sanctity of contracts, both in Latin America, the Western Hemisphere, and really around the globe.
So as part of managing that risk, do you anticipate that the government might be providing some sort of guarantees before people start putting their shareholder money into, say, refurbishing the oil production facilities in Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. You've heard the administration just this week talking about the idea that there might be some type of a government backstop, a guarantee, or some type of revenue sharing. These all seem like very preliminary ideas. It's very hard to understand exactly how that's going to work. Though I think the important point that I just made about kind of stability, rule of law, and contracts, what's really important about that is that it's not just a short-term focus. And so I think most companies, particularly when you're talking about making major multi-billion-dollar investments, they're looking for more stability and guarantees over the long term. Ultimately, where that comes from is this ability to enforce contracts, not from any kind of short-term government guarantees. So I think if we're relying on government guarantees to backstop unstable situations in foreign countries, it's probably not necessarily a great recipe for really large investments and long-term growth.
Let's shift to the economy here. We're putting up a chart which Moody's projects how policies might impact growth in 2026. You can see that once you include factors such as rate cuts or AI-related capex, we get pretty close to that magic number of 3%. But then we lose more than half a percentage point because of tariffs and trade policy, and we lose another half a percentage point because of restrictive immigration policy. The upshot seems to be growth of less than 2%, or at least that's what Moody's is projecting. Now, we know the president wants stronger growth. What do you see in terms of policy options here to get that back up to 3%?
Yeah, well, this is a moment in which we need to maximize tailwinds and minimize headwinds, right? And so if we step back for a second and we think about global growth and then focusing on US economic growth, and we think about the fundamental factors, part of it is deep capital, but it can be deployed. Part of it is human capital. And demographics are finally catching up with the United States. And so we have a workforce that is barely growing at all. Absent immigration, it would actually be shrinking in size. That means that you really need public policy firing on all cylinders if you want to maximize economic growth. And so we have a lot of things going for us. The One Big Beautiful Bill, particularly its incentives for capital investment, really are a spur to help take advantage of those deep capital pools to deploy them in the real economy, making and servicing things. AI is in itself an efficiency game changer. At least we hope it and expect it will be. Those things are helping supercharge the economy. You take immigration policy, trade, and tariff policy, and we subtract from that. So we can start by getting those two things right, and then we can clean up a lot of the things that clog up the economic system: overregulation, permitting red tape, a abusive trial bar system. There are a lot of things that we could do that would take sand out of the gears that would help us get to that 3% magic number.
So I want to touch on a number of those things that you just mentioned, but starting with AI, what do we need right now in terms of regulation in order to ensure that the disruption that's probably going to be inevitable at this point is overwhelmed by the positive benefits, so to speak? Certainly, there are some who say that we need new legislation in order to manage this transition. I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is that whatever we do on the regulatory front, we do it as a national standard. The real fear here is that 50 different states start having 50 different ideas about how AI is used in kind of every various form of economic activity and commerce. Today the chamber's tracking over 1,100 AI bills at the state level. This is in red states and blue states alike. They want to tell businesses and individuals how you're allowed to use AI, what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. You really can't operate a modern American business of any size if every time you switch state lines, the tools that you use somehow change the requirements and restrictions on them. So first and foremost, whatever is done has to be done at a national level. It has to preempt state laws. The second thing is we got to get very clear-eyed about the problems that we're trying to solve. For example, some people point to the risks that AI could be discriminatory in its operations. Well, the fact is that discrimination is illegal today, whether you're doing it manually or whether you're doing it through AI. I'm not sure that we need some new law or regulation there to deal with. There are going to be areas that are new and novel because of AI. And if we zero in on those aspects of it, I think we're going to have a framework that frankly mirrors what we did in the 1990s with the emergence of the internet, that effectively allows a level playing field for individuals to innovate using this new technology. And that's what the opportunity is in terms of economic growth.
Well, if we're able to do that, that certainly would contribute to growth. I wonder if I could shift to tariffs right now. Got a couple of questions on the tariff front. One notes that the complying with all the red tape and complexities has actually increased regulation, not decreased it. And another is asking, how will SCOTUS rule on the IEPA decision that we anticipate in the weeks ahead? I wonder if you just
Well, I'll take the second one first. I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish I could tell everyone today how the court will rule. I think a couple important things to note. It did appear at the oral arguments that there was a fair degree of skepticism of the broad nature of these IEPA tariffs. In point of fact, the administration has lost at every level of the court system to date. So I don't know that any of us should be surprised that the Supreme Court were to say that the president can't use IEPA in this manner. I think the second important thing to note is that doesn't necessarily mean we're suddenly going to have massive tariff relief or more certainty on the tariff and trade outlook. The reality is that the president has lots of other authorities that he can use to implement and impose tariffs. Some of them don't work quite as well. It's not exactly a direct one-to-one match, but he has other authorities that aren't likely to be subject to legal challenge. And so I don't know, even if the Supreme Court strikes down the IEEPA tariffs, that we should necessarily expect a significant drop in the effective tariff rate or necessarily any more clarity around kind of the onerous and ever changing.
It's an important note of caution there. We've got another member question that turns us to the elections later this year. Will happen if in the midterms the Democrats actually take the House? Are we to look at more policy paralysis, impeachment hearings? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. America's in a bit of a pattern here, right? So if you go from 1960 to 1998, elections every 2 years, we had 20 elections. In those 20 elections, the American public changed who was in charge of the House, the Senate, or the White House only on 7 times, 7 out of those 20 elections over the course of 40 years. If you go from 2000 to today, we've had elections every 2 years. And in every instance but twice, the American people have decided to change the party in charge of the House, the Senate, or the White House. So power by either party is experienced very briefly. It's also a pattern that every kind of new president begins their term in office with unified control of government. That's been true every year since Bill Clinton took office in 1993. Also true in every instance except one, they promptly lost control in the midterm election. So I don't know that anyone should be terribly surprised if there is a change in control. That is the historic pattern. Um, uh, in the modern environment, that means that it's a lot more difficult to get things done because you have to get them done on a bipartisan basis. You have an administration that is in the last 2 years of its final term. Everyone's going to be turning to the 2028 election. I think in practice, what it means is a continuation of the trend that we've now seen for over 15 years, and that is more policy making moves from Capitol Hill to the administration and to individual agencies. And so a lot more regulatory activity, a lot more executive orders, as hard as that is to imagine given the record number this past year. But the policymaking won't be on Capitol Hill, unfortunately. Probably won't be done in a bipartisan basis. It'll be more of this administrative actions. I think for business, what that means is those changes aren't necessarily very durable. If there's a change in party control of the White House after the next administration, everything that was done, as Barack Obama famously said, with a pen and a phone, can be undone by the next person who's got the same pen and the same phone.
So we've got multiple questions today on permitting reform and where that stands, regardless of who controls Congress. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, what the outlook is for that. Certainly, there are people from both sides of the aisle that are anxious to see this see.
Yeah, so this is one of the few areas where we may see legislative progress in 2026. For several years now, there have been bipartisan discussions about how to reform a very broken permitting system. We tend to talk about the process of permits, the fact that in some instances today, to get a federal permit, it requires tens of thousands of pages of submissions, that it can take longer to get your permit approved than it does to actually construct a project. But there are some new concerns that are animating interest on Capitol Hill. And that's the fact that once people have secured permits, a change in administration or a court case filed sometimes 6 years after the permit was granted can actually shut down construction. We saw that with the Keystone Pipeline. We saw that with some critical mineral projects in Alaska when the Biden administration reversed permits granted by the Trump administration. And we've just seen it with the Trump administration reversing permits granted for offshore wind farms. So I think there's an opportunity here. I think both Republicans and Democrats are saying, wait a minute. A permit has to mean something if it's been granted, and it can't be the case that administrations can simply reverse the process for things that they just decide that they don't like. So there's a real opportunity to fix that here. I'm not going to make any guarantees that it'll happen, but there is an opportunity.
Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but with some in Congress are there some in Congress that are worried that the focus on our hemisphere, in the Western Hemisphere, will cause us to miss opportunities in Asia or Europe?
Well, absolutely. I mean, listen, I think there's, uh, in many ways, if you think back, a little over a year and a half ago, there was a kind of a view that one of the few bipartisan consensus in Washington was concern about China and the need to address kind of what are believed to be malign activities there. Um, in some ways, that focus has kind of faded away in Washington as we focus on the Western Hemisphere. And so I do think there are folks who are looking to that. I think folks who are thinking about the medium and long term also are focused on Africa. If you think about where population and income growth is going to be over the next several decades, Africa is the new East Asia in terms of economic opportunity, emergence of a middle class, investment opportunities. We're not paying near enough attention to Africa at the moment. And so, yeah, I do think that there are a lot of people who are looking around the globe saying, we're going to have to walk and chew gum.
We touched on immigration policy a little bit earlier. I wonder if you could sort of give the outlook for what you anticipate over the course of the year for both the HB1 visa and any other questions about the reliance on immigrant labor that the economy in the United States relies on so heavily.
Yeah, so the reality is that immigrant labor, both legal and individuals who entered the country illegally, but then were subsequently given a legal work authorization. So employers hired them legally to work over the last 5 or 6 years has masked a demographic population decline in the prime working age. The reality is that we're just not having as many kids. That the baby boom generation is retiring. The generations behind them aren't as large. We have more seniors to support and fewer workers available to support them. Immigration masked a lot of that. Um, Everyone wants to deal with the U.S. Chamber. We want to deal with illegal immigration, but we have to understand that we need to supplement our workforce with more legal immigration. I think what's concerned us is this pattern that legal pathways, H-1B visas, for example, seasonal work visas, even student visas, and many of those students often then are able to convert from a student visa into a type work visa, that those are slowing down, that we're not taking advantage of those. And that portends real problems for the U.S. labor force. I think we're going to have a serious discussion with both parties. We maintain the border that we've now secured. We don't want to reverse that, but that we meet our economic needs by expanding legal immigration. There are bipartisan discussions kind of quietly behind the scenes in Congress. Election years are really tough to be able to do something on immigration. But at some point, if we really get to 3% plus growth, we are going to be so hurting for workers that I think the political pressure will really quite mount on politicians from both parties to finally do something to modernize the system.
Now, we have another question here from a member asking what your thoughts are on a second reconciliation bill and whether or not the Growth Act might be included in this one.
Yeah, I think that we're going to hear lots of talk about a second reconciliation bill as we get into this year. And so the filibuster, thankfully, is not going to go away. It's actually been a good facet of how Congress operates from the chamber's perspective. But there is a lot of pent up demand to legislate. And one of the ways to do that is to do budgetary items through this simple majority 51 vote threshold in the Senate. And so I think we're going to see a lot of interest to address healthcare, additional tax items, maybe some spending items through reconciliation. I don't think it's a guarantee that a reconciliation bill gets done. The quite hard in 2025, and it had a lot of things going for it, including the fact that it was a piece of legislation that was considered too big to fail, can't miss, given the automatic tax increases that would have occurred. So we don't have that type of momentum, but I think it's going to be a serious part of the discussion. The Growth Act is a piece of tax legislation that would basically say that if you're in mutual funds, if you have dividends, for example, you don't, and they're reinvested in your mutual fund, you don't have to pay taxes on those. It's a pretty common sense treatment for mutual funds, similar to how we treat other investment vehicles. I think that type of legislation is certainly the type of thing that could end up in a second reconciliation bill.
Yeah, I think that's the way they treat ETF investments right now already. So it seems like a pretty natural fit. The final series of questions, I'd like to step back and ask you how you summarize this moment. Are we witnessing the emergence in Washington of a new world order? And if so, what does your gut tell you about how that's going to shape up?
Well, I think we may in fact be in a pivot moment. I think it's in a moment in which the post World War II kind of global order, the neoliberal order has taken on a bad name. I don't think it deserves that bad name. It's a description of an era that was focused on free markets, free trade, kind of classic American ideals of enterprise and expanding those globally. But we're in a moment in which populists on the right and progressives on the left are challenging those ideas. I think it's incumbent for those of us who believe in free markets, who believe in capitalism, believe in our democratic system and our concept of rule of law to push back and kind of defend some of those values. I think where we end up, I think it's too soon to tell. But I think the arguments, the discussions that are occurring right now are bigger than just an individual policy or a response to a perceived failure. I think we're really at its core, we're having a discussion about what the relationship is between government and the private sector, and what the relationship is between the United States and the rest of the world.
Well, central to that question and those values that you mentioned earlier is going to be a strong economy. What is your forecast for this year about the growth expectations? How do you see us achieving that 3% threshold that you've eloquently spoken about in the past of being central to all of our goals and ambitions?
Yeah, it's possible that we could get there. I'm not certain that we're going to get there because we've gotten the mix of policies exactly right, and so we're going to have a fairly large stimulus in the first half of 2026 as a result of the tax changes that were enacted in 2025, but not practically felt. So current estimates are about 100 million tax filing Americans will get a refund that's on average close to $1,000 bigger in 2026 than they got in 2025. It's a lot of juice for the economy. Does that help spur economic activity? Does it keep inflation elevated? I think that all remains to be seen. But I think we have a lot of things going that help anticipate that. That's on top of some really good things: the investment for provisions of the tax bill, the deregulation. But if we're going to get to sustained 3% growth, that's not kind of a one-time high. That's going to require maximizing AI. That's going to require getting our workforce policies right. That's going to require completing permitting and deregulation reform. It's going to require doing things about our legal system so that we're not wasting so much money and driving up prices through frivolous litigation. So we have the pathway to get there, but we have some real choices ahead of us to figure out if we can capitalize to get from 2% growth, which is fine, it's not a recession, but to get to where we really need to be, which is 3% plus, if we want to create the kind of opportunities that Americans have come to expect and frankly that they deserve.
It's my final question for you, Neil. Some have found Washington's recent policy mix risky and unsettling. But I'm thinking the old adage here that embedded in every risk is an opportunity. Is there room for optimism?
I think there are a lot of opportunities. I think part of it is I think any responsible business leader has to know how to manage this environment. You don't always get the government that you dream of, or that you wish, or the process that you dream of and you wish. You get the one that you have, and you figure out how to navigate it. I think the real opportunities are recognizing what's going on in the private sector. People often ask, "Are you optimistic about anything?" I'm actually more optimistic than I am pessimistic, and I'm optimistic because of what we see from the U.S. Chamber's vantage point occurring in the private sector. As we were coming out of COVID, we had a huge surge in new business starts, and everyone thought it was going to be temporary. And we've leveled off at a level that's much higher than the pre-COVID baseline. Guess what happened in 2025? It soared even higher. So people are entrepreneurial. They are taking risks. They are starting businesses. When you think about AI and you think about the economic opportunities, we often talk about efficiency, and absolutely AI is going to create efficiencies. What it's also creating is this new kind of personalized economy, the concept that we're going to have personalized medicine and healthcare treatment. We're going to have personalized and curated media and entertainment. Even how we consume things is going to become much more personalized. And so, we went from manufacture, agriculture, to manufacturing, to service. We're now entering kind of a personalization economy. And if you combine that with the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic and a lot of opportunities to take advantage of.
Well, there's a lot to look forward to. Neil, we deeply appreciate you joining us today and shedding light on what is clearly going to be a very busy year. Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President, Chief Policy Officer, and Head of Advocacy here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
All right, our audience has gotten their shot of informational espresso and is ready to tackle the day. Coming up next week, we'll have Marjorie Chorlin, Senior Vice President for European Affairs here at the U.S. Chamber, to address a key question: can Europe defend itself? Missed a live episode? Catch the replay on our website, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. And you can also listen to the call's podcast edition on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to you, our members, for joining us. And we wish you a safe and productive new year. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.